Hello. Yes. Microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Hello. That was Lindsay. I recognize her. I see the red light. Loud and clear, Lindsay.
MCL Walker.
When you're ready, you're okay? Okay. All right. I call to order the City Council for the City of Petoskey for this April 18th, 2022 City Council meeting. I ask that you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America's flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk Class, would you please call roll?
Moore,
Present.
Shields,
Here.
Wagner,
Here.
Walker,
Present.
Murphy.
Present, we have a quorum, all 5 of us are here today. Next, I'd like to read to you City of Petoskey proclamation. It's regarding Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Whereas sexual assault is a devastating abuse of power that affects people of every age, race, sex, gender, identity, sex orientation, national origin, social economic background, and religion. And whereas, according to the Centers for Disease Control, nearly 1 in 5 women and 1 in 38 men have experienced of a completed or attempted rape during their lifetime. Whereas 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys experience sexual abuse in childhood. And whereas approximately 1 in 2 Native American women and 1 in 4 Native American men have experienced sexual assault violence in their lifetime as well. Whereas approximately 7 in 10 perpetrators of sexual assault know their victims. Let's see. And whereas sexual violence often has a deep and enduring impact on the survivors and their psychological, emotional, social, and physical health. And whereas sexual assault can be devastating, not just for the survivor, but also for the family and friends of the survivor. And whereas access to informed, supportive, and inclusive services can greatly increase survivor's ability to heal from that sexual assault. Whereas we join with the Michigan Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention and Treatment Board, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and sexual assault prevention advocates to acknowledge the importance of working together to educate our community about sexual violence prevention, support survivors, and speak out against the harmful attitudes and actions. Now, therefore, I, John Murphy, Mayor of City of Petoskey, do hereby proclaim April 2022 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in our city. So I did this today. I think it's very important for all of us to do our part to support survivors, educate those that could be abusers, report those that have, and to support all of those involved with this terrible problem in our country. Councilor, do you have anything you want to add? Okay. Next is our consent for the consent agenda, and I turn that over and want to ask for approval of the following. The March 21st, 2022 regular session meeting minutes, the March 23rd and 24th and April 11th, 2022 special sessions of city council meeting minutes, as well as acknowledge a report concerning certain administrative transactions that have occurred since March 21st, 2022. I take it to council for possible motion or discussion of changes. Mr. Wagner.
I'll motion to approve the consent agenda, Mayor.
Support.
I have a motion from Ms. Wagner and a second from Ms. Demore. Any other questions, council? I turn it over to Clerk Plath for roll.
Demore. Aye. Excuse me, Wagner.
Yes.
Demore. Aye. Fields.
Yes.
Walker. Yes. Murphy.
Yes, motion for acceptance of the consent agenda passes 5-0.
Mayor, I did have a couple of questions on the check register, if I may.
Okay. Bring it on. Page
Page 8.
and column, if there is a column.
Oh, it's on page 8. And it's the majority of what's on page 8.
Okay, hang on. Let us get there. Okay, your concerns.
So
Good
I
question.
just had a question about how the entries for Gibby's Garage, and then there was entries and then they were all voided out. And then at the bottom, you have Gibson Excavating at $11,195. The total above was $4,235. Then if you go back to page for the check register for
Did you have, do we want to start with Gibby's Garage? I don't know. Gibby's,
Gibby's and Gibson's are the same place, right? No, not the same place? No. Okay, got it. All right. And then, so then on the next section of check register, excuse me.
I just don't know if you want us to answer one question at a time here. or-
No, that was it. And then there was another section where there was the same charges later in the month in 412, 413, sorry. excuse me.
Page,
So again, page 11.
page 11. Gibby's Garage.
Yeah, and
Yes.
so then there was billed invoice there, but the total was less. So I'm just wondering, was it just an oversight and?
No, what happened was, Libby's check was issued 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I think, on a Wednesday. He did not receive it. He waited until the following Monday to receive the check, and it was he never received it in the mail.
Okay.
So when you void a check and reissue it, it shows up as negatives and then positive.
Right,
And so that's what happened.
okay, all right,
And then on the next page would have been the next week of work.
okay, so that was a different billing
Subsequent
period. Okay,
invoice.
got it. All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, council? Okay. Moving right along, number 6 on our agenda is miscellaneous public comments. This is your opportunity to step forward to the mic, give us your full name, full address, and address council if you wish on a item, or if you wish to have comment or questions to council themselves, us here. If you have a comment or a question that you wish to share in an upcoming agenda item, I ask that you wait until then if you can. If you can't, you can step up and talk. But it would it would help if you waited, okay? So is there anybody in public that wishes to address council at this point? Is there anybody online that wishes to address council? Sarah? No. Okay. We'll move right along. Now we're going to go to city manager's update, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to city manager Terry.
Sure, just one update, and that's on basically East Lake Street progress report. Our largest project for the year. It's going as scheduled, so it's going very well. The East Lake Street Division intersection has been completed, and that'll reopen tomorrow. That won't be paved, it'll just be like it'll be a hard course put across it, so it'll be usable. And then they're working their way up the street now towards William Street. The sewer portion of that has been completed, and they're beginning the water main section of that, and then following that'll be the storm section. And as that gets completed, then you'll start seeing them continue up the next section. And each block is, before they complete one, they will start the next section though. So each person who's doing the sewer in that order, water main, storm sewer, can continue working.
I'm sure there'll be a question, a call to one of us. When would you think that that would be paved?
The first, I think I can do a first course prior to the whole thing being completed, or,
The intersection.
The intersection,
Yeah, we're looking at, as soon as the asphalt plant's open,
okay,
we're working on what we call a T right now. It's the division and East Lake intersection up to Williams and then each way on Williams. So our goal is if we can get all the concrete work in, we put the base course all in at the same time.
okay.
So that's our goal, and then we'll move up the street.
That helps because we do get calls, Martin.
Yeah, we received a few. It's been pretty quiet.
Yeah.
But we hope to have it at least passable tomorrow
That's great.
temporarily.
Sounds good. Any other questions from the council or the public on the city manager's updates? There being none, we're gonna go to old business. First, there's the adoption of a proposed national flood insurance program required floodplain ordinance. And I turn that over to city manager Terry.
sure, at our previous regular city council meeting, the city council was introduced to an ordinance that would designate Emmett County as the ones who would regulate and cover the flood insurance program for FEMA, which the city does participate in, but it is handled through the county through the construction codes. And then also within, at that last meeting, city council approved an intergovernmental agreement with Emmett County that would provide for them to provide those services. City council approved the intergovernmental agreement, which Emmett County approved on their end at their last commissioner meeting. So that's set. But this, we still need to approve the ordinance, which this will be the second meeting on that, so city council could approve it. Necessary in order for the city to participate in the flood insurance program, which allows residents who are in floodplains that are required to have flood insurance to be able to receive flood insurance through that program, which is at a much less expensive cost than what I would say private companies are at. So there is an advantage to belong to that.
So what we're looking for is an approval, a motion and approval of the proposed floodplain insurance ordinance designating Emmett County as the enforcing agency.
I'll be happy, Mayor, to make a motion
Very good.
to approve the intergovernmental agreement with Emmett County.
I have a motion from Ms. Walker and I have a second from Mr. Shields.
Ordinance, excuse me.
I'll second the motion.
Any other discussion? Ms. Demore.
Just a point of clarification for the public. Mr. Terry, the ordinance does not in and of itself increase or decrease the impact areas where flood insurance is required. That it has nothing to do with changing those definitions. It's only allowing access to less expensive flood insurance coverage for those who need it.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, the floodplain is determined by FEMA through their studies. So they, within their different studies, may change things up or down based on the water flow data. But the city's ordinance has nothing to do with that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, council, or comments? Does the public wish to weigh in on this prior to voting? There being none, I take it over to city clerk Plath for roll.
Walker,
Yes.
Shields,
Yes.
Demore. Aye. Wagner.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. And other old business, introduction of a proposed ordinance to create licensing and regulatory framework for fortune telling in the city. I turn this also over to city manager Terry.
Sure. Back in February, city council, we came to city council and based on conversations or emails that Tina Demore had received from an individual, we were looking at possibly repealing the one sentence ordinance that the city has that prohibits any type of fortune telling in the city of Petoskey. And at that meeting, city council also heard from former public safety director John Calabrese about what he felt was the importance of having some type of regulation over that industry. And city council asked the administration to create an ordinance regulating fortune telling, but allowing it in the city and coming back with city council. So we've come back to you with a proposed ordinance that would allow it and regulate it. It has been created based on those discussions with John Calabrese and also from Matt Breed And Matt Cross, our city attorney, he came up with that also based on what other cities have had in I think more the downstate area. So you have this proposed ordinance. It provides a much larger definition than what we've had. Actually, we didn't have a definition at all, but it's a very large definition because there's a lot of, as you get into this, there's a lot of different things that can be included under fortune telling. So they try to include much of those areas. It does exclude uses as far as like solely for entertainment and also for religious purposes. The business locations would be inspected by Department of Public Safety, and then the individuals or the business would have to post their rates. And then it would require an annual application to be submitted to the city and approved. And they have a proposed fee of $150, of which $30 would be used for a required state background check, which we are charged by the state, or the actual individual is charged by the state to perform the background check, and then $20 would be for the fingerprinting, and then the rest would come to the city for our costs involved in filling out the application, completing that. And then also part of that too is we would still have our companion bill out there that would repeal the current ordinance, and before you could actually implement one that would allow for this ordinance. And I know there was also an email that was sent to us here today regarding some of those informations in there, and I think our city attorney can address some of those items, a couple of those items in there, if you would like to. And I do have Matt Cross is here, and then also Matt Breed to answer any questions you may have.
Understand that we are not voting on this today. This is not going to be adopted by council. This is a first reading and would come up in the next month. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. A quick question on that. I know we're not voting on this resolution tonight. Should council choose to repeal the former, the existing fortune telling ordinance?
You could do that tonight, and then at that point, I guess it would be allowed, but there just wouldn't be any regulation on anything. So yes,
Thank you.
correct. Because that was introduced back in February, so you can go ahead and approve that tonight.
And one other discussion, Mr. Wagner.
A couple comments. First of all, I appreciate the effort. In fact, we went from one sentence to a very complex.
About 5 pages now, yeah.
Matt, oh, there you go, Matt Cross, thank you. There were, when this came out today, there were some calls, some emails, there was a Facebook post. I want to make sure everybody knows the Facebook post. There was one directed at 4 of us by somebody who happens to know 4 of us and asking for a response, and our quiet wasn't that we were avoiding it, but I made sure that individual knows that it would be a violation of the Opens Meeting Act if we were to engage in that conversation on Facebook. So we were quiet. I replied to her individually. And so that's one. One of the things that came up specifically was the definition of a bona fide church or religious association, and who determines that, and who polices it. Essentially, that was one of the big questions. That some of the other concern was raised, I think, before they got to the exception part of the document.
Yes.
But anyway, those are my couple comments.
Yeah, and as far as the okay, what was the first one? It was
The bona fide church. Or
yeah,
religious-
and that's and I'll let Matt discuss that as well. But there is no cut and dry definition of what one is. Unfortunately, it's not like you go to the state of Michigan and they give you a permit and say, here, you're a bona fide religious organization.
Right.
There's just any number of laws out there, and you kind of start looking at all the different things, and as you kind of tick things off of what a church is and a religious activity is, then you kind of get to a point where you say, okay, there's enough here, you're bona fide religious. So I guess that's one of those things where you're going to have to use your judgment as a city and determine on individual cases. So individual people would have to ask. I could let Matt delve into some of those in a little bit quick more than that.
Yeah, so, and after speaking with Lindsay and Tina earlier today, that was one of the things they focused in on too, is that definition, what is a, bona fide religion. I did look at some other ordinances, primarily cities out west that impose regulatory schemes like this. And what they did to kind of make it a little more clear cut is they're actually, I'll just use it as an example, because the email we got was someone who is a pagan. Okay. That is a recognized religion. What some of those cities out west have done to take any confusion out of what religions we're going to recognize and what we aren't they need to have some sort of credentialing. And I did look, I mean, pagans do have a certification process. You could become sort of a minister of sorts. So you have some sort of schooling, some sort of training. That could be a way that we change this definition to make it a little bit clearer what actually is a bona fide religion, whether those beliefs are sincerely held. I will tell you that, I mean, the prudent approach would be to err on the side of recognizing a religious exemption. I mean, unless it's clearly fabricated for the purpose of avoiding this ordinance. That's just, it's murky water to get into any infringement on religious rights. So if it's even questionable, I think you err on the side of allowing the exemption, but it is a case by case basis. But
Does the fact, I thought I talked to the city attorney the other day, the fact of charging for services, does that change the status of a business needing to rent the license or not?
no, and that's, we talked about that potentially being the distinguishing factor, who's regulated and who isn't. If someone's just doing it, for free, do we regulate them? I think that's probably a bad way to distinguish who's regulated and who isn't. I mean, I can imagine scenarios where someone is taken advantage of and there's not direct remuneration, there's not a payment of money directly to that person, but for instance, someone can be cajoled into amending their will or something, requesting someone, giving them gifts. I mean, so that's not a really a great way in my mind to differentiate who should be regulated and who shouldn't. So, yeah, I mean, I hope that answers your question, but yeah, and I will address too, the general feeling of the two council members I talked to is like, well, we just went from one sentence to several pages. I will say that the repeal should happen sooner rather than later. I don't think that as written is defensible. If it was challenged, it's almost certain to get struck down. I think that blanket prohibition is blatantly unconstitutional. It shouldn't be there. So that needs to go. The question is what you replace it with. I do think this is a good approach. It's the same approach taken by the city of Warren. It's been on their books for over a decade. Some of the other things we talked about, we were concerned that there may be some argument that there's a lot of subjectivity built into this, who's ultimately going to get a license and who isn't, even after they jump through all these hoops. This ordinance actually says pretty clearly the circumstances under which you can deny a license. I mean, it's really limited. The Department of Public Safety is going to do their background check, but even after those results come back, there are clear-cut, defined reasons why you can withhold a license. So it's really not subjective in any way, shape, or form. And ultimately, I guess the bottom line from my point of view is anytime you're dealing with the First Amendment, you have to figure out what level of scrutiny a court's going to apply to this. This would be strict scrutiny. We need to have a compelling government interest, and this needs to be narrowly tailored to further that interest. Trying to prevent fraud is a compelling government interest. I believe this is narrowly tailored. Narrowly tailored does not mean it's drafted with surgical precision such that it only catches those fraudulent actors. That's impossible. You're never going to draft something like that. So bottom line for me, though, this is a defensible regulatory scheme. But any other questions I'm happy to answer.
Mr. Moore.
Well, mine is more a comment than a question. And with due respect for the difficulty of what you're trying to draft here, I couldn't support this as it's drafted. And as I expressed to you earlier today, I feel like the exceptions here, while it's obviously important that we have an exception for paid practices, these are too murky to me. And as a lawyer, I think it's really important for people to understand what it is they can and can't do. And when I read this, I'm not sure what that is. And again, no criticism of your efforts because it's extremely difficult. But I just think that for my part, it has to be more accessible and understandable. That's just my perspective. So thank you.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you. For the sake of those who weren't here February 7th, I just want to share my perspective, which was I came here intending to strike the current no fortune telling. And I don't know what others felt about that, but Mr. Calabrese, who joined us, explained why it was dangerous to do that. And it was because of fraud. It was because organized crime gets involved in a lot of municipalities through fortune telling, believe it or not. And people are treated fraudulently. Their money is taken from them. All of a sudden, it became a serious issue we should address responsibly and not just strike it. And so that's the background that led to this. And the intent was to prevent crime, not to prevent any religion or anyone else from practicing and doing what they're doing. And I don't know what the best language is for that, but that's it.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I think took me, thank you, Brian. It took me about an hour and a half to review the information. I had a very visceral reaction to reading this proposed language in this ordinance, and you know, I'll never get that hour and a half back of my life again, which is fine. I felt, and I spoke to somebody today about this very specific incident, and she had read the legal language there. And for law-abiding citizens to be treated like a criminal in an application process, the fingerprinting, the mug shots, the background criminal checks is offensive and deeply disturbing. The intention behind this was we had, like Brian had explained, we had originally assumed that there was this archaic old law on the boards, on the books that, you know, came from a context, maybe it was the turn of the century, something like that, when obviously people were, you know, the culture around fortune telling and traveling circuses and that maybe that was the reason that was created. But then we found out that really in 2014, the acting city manager and public safety had created this based on a very specific context of mostly elderly people being exploited in our neighborhood. So of course we were in our community. So of course that was like reason to like, okay, then maybe we need to look into this and not just be dismissive of what is a perceived archaic ordinance, a nuisance ordinance, and look into it further. But then to see this type of legal language, and I tried to look at our business ordinances in chapter 8 and compare similar language for applications for businesses. And I couldn't find anything that paralleled that. And I know that you provided this with a template that was from the city of Warren. And like Tina has mentioned, I appreciate the research and the ability to maybe learn from another community of how they created that legal language. But it feels very much like government overreach and, you know, having to pay $150 a year when, as a business operating in downtown Petoskey, you apply for a permit and it's $50, and that's for your lifetime. You don't have to renew that annually. So I would like to see something comparatively within our own ordinances and policies that would be reflective of what this kind of language could look like. Because to come up with a one sentence ordinance, a nuisance ordinance, and then go to a 6 or 7 page document, I just think we missed the target on this one. And
Please.
I didn't know it turned off, sorry. Okay, so I think it would be a mistake to just look at the length of this document and say it's bad because it's long. It's long because it's thorough. It's meant to precisely, again, when you're dealing with the First Amendment, you do not want an overly broad, a vague ordinance. I mean, this is, in my opinion, and I've looked at these schemes all over the country, and this is about as close as it gets to being concise, but being thorough at the same time, because you don't want, when I read the definition for this draft ordinance for what fortune telling is, I had to Google most of what these things are. I don't know what they are. So it's meant to be thorough, to cast as wide a net as possible. It's not, and to the point of, the background checks, the fingerprinting, I had to go through that when I joined the bar. I mean, it's not, these are things that people have to do. I mean, this is not that big of a burden for these people to shoulder. And, the fee's negotiable. I don't know how we came up with the $150, but I mean, that's something that we could amend. I do think that some of the revisions that I would put into a second iteration of this ordinance, I would put in an intent section 2, just to make it clear that, look, we're just trying to protect citizens from fraud. I think that's going to be important. More precisely defining what religious organizations qualify for the exception. I would stop short of trying to provide any list, like we did for what fortune telling is. I think that's going to be a bad path to go down. But I'm certainly, any guidance, you guys are the ones who have to vote this up or down. So if there's the things you want to see, things you want taken out, we could take another crack at it. I will note too, though, section 8-34 of the existing ordinances already asked for some of this information from businesses that are operating in the city. It's not nearly as thorough. It's not fingerprinting, it's not background checks, but it does ask for that very basic level of contact information, because part of the concern is, I get that it's maybe a antiquated stereotype, but I do think that it still exists, that people do come into town, take advantage of people, and then promptly leave. How do you find those people? How do you prosecute those people? That's why we have this type of information that we request. We need, addresses for the last 5 years. We need fingerprinting. We need all this information that makes it easier for law enforcement to go after these people if they need to. So,
Police Chief Breed, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think it's important that I think it's important that we do regulate this in some fashion to look out for the safety of those potential victims that are out there, as was discussed by my predecessor at a previous meeting. I understand that the First Amendment rights and the religious rights, and we certainly don't want to infringe upon those. Fully agree with Matt Cross on the ordinance as it exists right now, and how it is such a blanket ordinance that there is an issue with that. I think simply to repeal that and do nothing else would not be an acceptable measure, in my own opinion. I think we have an obligation to look at this pretty closely and come up with a resolution that will protect people while not infringing on other people's rights.
I like that summary. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo appreciation of Mr. Cross for putting this together, and the detail and the thoroughness, and Mr. Calabrese for bringing his concerns to us, for us to think a little deeper about this. From my perspective, this is a comment. I'm thinking, I look at this ordinance and I'm on the fence of how effective it would be, for one, and two, does it discriminate? I don't think it does. I think reading the exceptions, it would do the job, but it still has this perception of discrimination, of demeaning people who might practice the occult or these list of other things, and the definition of fortune telling. So for me, I want to take seriously the potential perception of discrimination or someone being demeaned, having their mugshot taken in order to get a license to practice their profession. So my question, when I want to weigh, is what is you mentioned the potential of fraud. So what is the potential of fraud in the city of Petoskey? And then weigh that against this potential for this perception of discrimination, and making someone who's already maybe on the fringes of society feel less than. And so I want to weigh that seriously. I think I'm curious, Director Breed, if you could speak to that potential. I mean, the city of Warren, I read earlier, is that the only? It's another question. Is that the only city in Michigan? So Petoskey would be city number 2. City of Warren's a lot larger than the city of Petoskey. I am all for being proactive, and we don't need a large precedent out there to do things that are right for our town. But let's consider that. Does Petoskey need to be the second city to have an ordinance regulating this? Is the threat high enough? I guess
First off, I don't think those people that you are talking about are fringe people. They are everyday people in our society like everybody else. So to call them on the fringe, that's not really, I don't think that's fair to them or anybody.
Absolutely, and I didn't.
It's kind of discriminatory.
And absolutely allow me to not to explain. I was not referring to any discriminatory. I meant to say, as religious speaking, you look at religious demographics, they have a lower percentage of the population in a religious sense. That's all I meant to. So thank you for clarifying.
Mr.
Wagner.
Adding on to that, Director Breed, On February 7th, my recollection is that Mr. Calabrese was asked for an opinion on, what do you think it would take? What would you change? And I believe the comment was as simple as, just by having a form to fill out, maybe a fee and a background check would discourage organized crime from ever getting involved in our town. It was as simple as that. So related to your question, I'd just like your perspective on that.
Public Safety Director Reed.
You just turned it off, Matt.
I couldn't see the red from this. To back up, the percentages, we have to be very careful dealing with percentages, because if you are a victim, but you are only 1%, you're still a victim. So percentages are a tricky situation. I think we're dealing more here with a balance in finding that application or ordinance that's most applicable. Can it be a simple application? I think it's relatively simple the way it is, maybe more in depth than this council wishes. But there is also that element of criminal enterprise. As Mr. Calabrese indicated, it's his opinion that we haven't had these issues because we had an ordinance that prohibited it. So let's remove that, but let's also be conscious of that threat that's out there. Let's make certain we know who it is that is participating in this type of business, so that if there are unfortunate victims, we have the avenues that we need to pursue the suspects.
Could you do that without fingerprinting?
The fingerprinting is how the background check is completed. The fingerprinting, the physical fingerprinting that we would do here would then go back to the applicant. They would request their criminal history from the state police. We aren't going to request it. They're going to request it and provide to us their criminal history.
Do you end up keeping the fingerprints?
No, sir.
So
That individual, the applicant, sends those to the state police.
So you will do the
Then retains it.
fingerprints for them. You don't
We-
keep a copy, you give
No.
them their copy. They then send it in with to the state for a background check.
That is correct.
Okay.
And then they would have the responsibility to bring that background check to us.
And when they bring it back, does that include fingerprints?
The card itself,
Yeah.
no, it does
No,
not.
it does not. Okay,
No,
all right.
it will show a record of
Okay.
arrest and then a record of conviction.
So that fingerprints would not be kept, it would only be done given.
Those are the property
Those
of
are
the
property of the
applicant.
person. It's not like they're, will be stored in a file someplace.
Absolutely not.
Mr. Moore, you had a question.
Yeah, actually, a statement, sort of. Just getting back to Matt's statement about the importance of the things aren't overly broad or vague. As far as clarity of purpose, like I look at exception A. And this is accepting people who are entertaining the public, demonstrating mind reading, mental telepathy, etc., in public places, in the presence and hearing of other persons. That's an exception. So I'm looking at that and thinking, why is that an exception? I don't know, is this person being paid when it's in public? What's the difference with that? And why is that in there? Is that something, thanks, is that something to do with the purpose we're seeking? I find this to be vague. I'm not sure why that's there or why it was selected. And maybe-
I'll ask the city attorney for
Yeah,
that
you can speak to
answer.
that.
Yeah, I can clarify that. So essentially, the stereotypical scenario that we're talking about, where the concern for fraud is really that the scenario where someone, you take them behind the curtain and it's just the two of them one-on-one, there's a little more danger of coercion. It's just that but that kind of disappears when you have a large audience, everyone's hearing what you're saying. There could be remuneration. You should be getting paid to just do a performance in front of several people, but That's not the type of harm that these types of ordinances are aimed at. This is, if you're just going to be entertaining a large group, that's not the same thing as having someone in a room one-on-one where you may be able to take advantage of that person. You're not gonna take advantage, in theory at least, of a person who's one of 100 in a large group. That's really why they, and it's common language for what it's worth. I mean, all the schemes that I've seen that try to tackle this problem, they carve out exceptions for exactly this. And when we were talking, we call it the carnival exception. That's kind of what they all do. It's at the fair, it's on the public square, it's a large group. That's not the type of danger that we're worried about. It's that in the private, the building you're conducting your fortune telling in, one-on-one, small groups, that's what this is aimed at. So that's why it's there.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Breed, the criminal enterprise that perpetuate this type of scam that we'd be concerned about, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming they would have businesses that would open up throughout the state, different places. Is that something, I mean, without this ordinance, the concern about being able to prosecute and stop the fraud, is that something that maybe could be handled out beyond the city of Petoskey? The state or federal level would help prosecute this? Is it, or does it depend on the ability to have a local ordinance on file in order to press charges?
Public Safety Director Breed, could you address that question?
The ordinance on file at a local municipality would be significantly beneficial. Your other resources are stretched far too thin as it is, and what may be a victim within our community that we would like to help. If you're looking to the FBI, unless there's a very significant dollar figure, you're not going to hear from them. So this allows us to do our job on a local level.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak right now? Mr. Mack?
One more thing.
Come on down.
Yeah, kind of going beyond theory to specifics. I know we're not going to know tonight, but if we knew in the next 2 weeks, if this applied to anybody currently doing business in Petoskey, that would be fascinating to know, because I know there's concerns from people who are in business today about the language of this, that all of a sudden they're going to, all of a sudden, so for those on the phone, concerns that I've heard today from people who are here in Petoskey doing business, that this would suddenly apply to them. And I know, again, that's not the intent, but if anybody read this and came forward and said, I'm concerned that's my business, that would help.
What are you suggesting that there are people? It sounds like you think
I'm
people are
suggesting
saying
that
they're worried
some of the
about it.
concerns that were shared today were people who are here doing business. And what this might refer to as fortune telling.
What are we talking about now? What kind of business are we talking about? Serving alcohol, selling lottery
Telling
tickets.
people's future, telling people's future, telling them about their things that are going on with energy in the world and impacting them. And to me, that could be fortune telling. Suggesting to people
This
that
stemmed from our community. So if he's talking about something that's like real tangible businesses that are already operating in our community that brought this to our attention because they're paying attention to the ordinances that pertain to their business. So this has been carried forth since beginning in February, when Tina and I had those conversations and we first brought up the ordinance.
I want to make sure that we're addressing that exception that comes into town in this criminal, not impacting businesses that are here legally already.
Just a point of order too,
Please.
so there is that is sort of addressed in the ordinance. If there's someone who's already operating as a fortune teller in the city, they would have 90 days to obtain a license. So it's not, this isn't a scenario where people would be grandfathered in. It would be, they would have a window of time in which to obtain a license. So it would apply to people who are fortune telling in the city already. So just to
But it
clarify.
sounds like, Mr. Wagner, are you talking of different practices other than fortune telling that would be covered under this?
It's a broad definition of fortune telling. I'm suggesting that the people and organizations who are doing what's defined here today and would all of a sudden have to go through this process, and I don't believe they should have to. I believe we're trying to address that criminal element that's coming in.
That's a good point. I mean, we could add a grandfathered exception in here because
Not grandfathered, just forevermore, those businesses that are doing what they're doing today legally, their next generation should be able to do the same thing. It's not hurting, it hasn't been hurting Petoskey. It's just my perception.
that's certainly, and I think it'd be helpful before we leave today to get some marching orders from you guys as to what, you know, for instance, I can give you some alternative definitions for fortune telling, more simplified versions. It's just the type of, it's a hard thing to pin down. It's you know, I know nothing about this world. I think they should be allowed to, you know, to practice their religion, their practice, whatever they want to do. I just don't know how to define it. You know, we're relying on what others have done before us, and that this is how other ordinances have defined it. We could define it more narrowly. So that's your call.
Mr. Moore.
Would you have any concerns about us moving ahead to eliminate the existing ordinance this evening as we problem solve the new one going forward? And in fact, might you even recommend that we do so?
Right, you know, to some degree, I think we should defer to Director Breed and let him weigh in as well. But I will tell you, as I said before, as it's written now, the fortune telling prohibition, it is not constitutional. It's not enforceable. It's really just taking up space in our code of ordinances. So, you know, it really, in my mind, the way, of course, I analyze it is, even if we could rationalize it as providing some level of protection from that type of fraud that we're worried about, it doesn't really, because if we try to enforce it, it's almost certain to, you know, someone's going to successfully challenge that. We're not going to be able to make anything stick. So, so I guess my opinion would be it needs to be repealed. You know, if you don't enforce it, if the Department of Public Safety is not enforcing it, it's really kind of a moot. You know, it could sit there theoretically, but yeah, I would defer to Director Breed.
Thank you.
Public Safety Director Breed, could you comment?
I guess it would comment that only a fool argues with his attorney. If counsel for the city determines that this is an unenforceable ordinance and that it's unconstitutional, I don't see how we could, in good mind and good presence of mind, keep it on the books.
Okay. Ms. Walker.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to remove the nuisance ordinance on fortune telling, but I wanted to ask you first if you wanted to receive public comment before I made a motion.
Normally, if it's a motion that we're discussing, you would make the motion, I would give a second, council would discuss it, then I will go to the public.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore, 1 second. You have a question on that?
Does it need to be on our agenda to move on this, or can we just go?
No, it does not. It's on the agenda now, and I brought it up that it's on this agenda. And that this would need to be approved as part of the process if city council decide, at least if it decides to approve a new ordinance allowing it, you definitely have to get the old one off. That doesn't allow it, so. And it was introduced back in February, so city council may go ahead and adopt it tonight.
Ms. Walker.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to remove the nuisance ordinance on fortune.
Support.
I have a motion from Ms. Walker, second from Mr. Moore. Council, any other questions about the discussion? Does the public, this is your opportunity to speak to council. You would come up, give us your full name, your full address, and you have 5 minutes to address council if you wish at this point. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to council? Come forward, either one of you, yes.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Sarah Catherine Snyder. I live at 807 Howard Street in Petoskey, Michigan, 49770. I appreciate the effort that is going into preventing fraud and crime in our community. I wonder if the same effort is applied to anything else that's non-denominational. Like, our construction workers fingerprinted and mugshotted and background checked by the city before they receive their license? I guess.
That would be done.
Okay. My big thing is that I've heard repeatedly tonight that none of you really know what my religion is about. You don't practice it. You don't really know what it means. You don't really know beyond the broad definition from another city what it even was. And you yourself said that you had to look up what some of those are.
You're to address council.
Oh, sorry.
These people, but these five of them.
But anyway, I would just like to know why this is so criminal to begin with. There are so many other perfectly legitimate businesses that can be a structure for a scam. And then fortune telling comes up as a scam, as a structure for a scam. Even though people willingly seek it out and pay for it, knowing that it potentially could be. It's very much a gamble. But for those of us that practice sincerely and with no criminal intent, being criminalized from the very beginning of the licensing process is insulting. And the terminology of this ordinance intimidated me and made me feel like I was doing something wrong when I would absolutely pass a criminal background check. I absolutely have fingerprints that have never been fingerprinted before because I've never even seen the inside of a police department in my entire life. I don't even cross the street unless it says cross. So that's my say. I'm not a criminal. And when I practice my spirituality, I do not do so to defraud anyone of anything whatsoever.
I think when we have this discussion, it isn't about individuals that follow the nature of being good to people, okay? That's not what this is about. Good, please come forward.
My name is Megan Van Grimm. I actually live outside of the city, but I am an ordained minister.
I need your address though.
353 Hillview Drive, Petoskey. I am an ordained minister. I do have that credibility. My concern here is on section 8397 of receipts. My question would be, are any other businesses audited for their transaction receipts? My concern is that this would be a violation of privacy between myself and my client. Those who seek me out, they don't want the entire community to know their business. They seek me out for private counsel. We meet, we do what we do. If payment is exchanged, payment is exchanged. It's not always the case. However, if someone feels compelled to do so, okay. I often ask for donations to be made to charitable organizations. So my question is, really need to look at that auditing of receipts part, because I don't think that that's fair in practice. I don't really know if that could be enforceable to, are you going to go to every business downtown if there's a complaint about that business and audit their receipts? You know, I appreciate the efforts being made to relieve people from the potential of fraud. I understand that that's a true thing. However, as an ordained minister and as someone who uses this as my faith and practice, and I would be happy to discuss it and give information to any that have questions about how it works. I'm more than happy to do that. It is so outside the realm of what we do to ever commit a fraud against an individual, because it is such a spiritual connection that it's just a violation of anything, just the code of being human. So I just would really like some clarification and really look at that section 8397 on receipts.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to council? Sir?
I'm Ryan Donahoe, 1125 Klondike, here in Petoskey. I'm the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church here in Petoskey. And as I read through this, from my standpoint as an ordained pastor who studied this, how it's written, there are religious organizations in Petoskey right now that are not accepting this. Some large institutions, because of how this is worded, that do not have agreements, are not understood to be, I think it says recognized by all groups of like faith. We would not meet that exception. And in my reading, this understanding is that religious entities can continue to practice as they want to, but how this is written, it can't. And I realize there are concerns about criminal enterprises. And I believe I understand that city council is trying to do this in the best way possible to protect people. But there are churches that are criminal enterprises. There are churches that do fortune telling. And even under the definition of what fortune telling is, churches fall under these definitions of fortune telling. And so I think we should be careful when, as a city, we are trying to regulate what are religious enterprises and what are not. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to council at this time? Sarah, is there anybody online that wishes to speak to council? Okay. I go to city clerk Plath for roll.
Mayor, it's a quick question for you. Do we need to give marching, could we do the marching orders question after we?
Yeah, because right now we are taking care of the proposal, the ordinance change. Plath.
Walker? Yes.
Moore,
Yes, aye.
Field,
Yes.
Wagner.
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes. Motion to repeal the framework of fortune telling in the past has been repealed. Now, if you want to talk about discussion about where you would like to take this, I'm open for discussion to council right now to give directives to city manager Terry and possibly our city attorney representative at this point. Mr. Shields.
Where is that, the section that Mr. Ryan Donahoe was referring to? What
Exemptions.
So that sounds like, Mr. Cross, Mayor, that sounds like one section that needs some reworking. And Tina mentioned that.
I mentioned A and B.
Yeah.
They're too broad.
Okay, let's open it up to tell people where you're at. This is Brian looking for where we're at.
So section 8396, I'm not prepared to give recommendations, but it sounds like there's members of the community that might have input as well.
And the receipt is the 8397.
Yep. And my one thought I have out here is if we're asking, and I'm open to discussing whether we need to keep receipts or not, but if we do, I think that the license, asking for a license, it should expire at the same 5-year cycle versus an annual. That we should ask for license to be a 5-year cycle to coincide with the receipts. Small thing. And then I question the need of a photograph and the need for planning and zoning department review.
What number are we on now?
Okay, that's 8403.
8403.
C
C.
is the planning and zoning department. had a big question mark, but why is that necessary? If that's just over bureaucratic, that could be.
I think it's simply just looking to see what zoning district you're in to make sure that that type of business is okay in that zoning district.
Okay,
I mean, it's not. any
but
more
that
than
would be, that would happen already
Not-
for a business to be open in a.
Yeah, but when they open, you have to say you're open, and this is where we're gonna conduct our business. Presumably, someone's gonna come to town and say, I want to become a fortune teller, this is where I'll be located. They'll look and say, oh, okay, that's whatever street, that's permissible there.
Okay, but if without this ordinance, if someone come town and start a business, they would,
Depending on where they're at, yeah.
yeah, okay. I
Because
just want
people who come to town and start a business do build a building, start a business, and you do check the zoning to make sure that that business is appropriate within that zoning district.
okay, so that just builds that other normal process into this ordinance. Wow. And then the photograph was section 8402. I get I understand the fingerprints for being able to go forward with the background check, but I'm not sure what the photograph is for.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think for me, I'm looking for clarity of purpose. I'm looking for succinctness, and I'm looking for it to be targeted at what we're looking to try to do. And then, of course, clarity on constitutional issues around religion. That's kind of overbroad, but the best I can do right now.
I hope you got that all down.
Yeah,
I couldn't get there, but I didn't try.
I have to listen to the recording.
Any other comments from council? Ms. Walker.
Yeah, we're drafting like this storyline about businesses coming from out of town. Whereas like I'm talking about an existent business that wants to host a workshop to do tarot readings or ruin readings or tea leaf readings. I'm not talking about somebody coming from out of town. This isn't like a storyline that we're crafting of some outsiders coming in to fortune tell and exploit our community. This is like real businesses that would like to host a workshop. She wouldn't dare host a workshop unless she knew that she was following every rule that was in the books, because that's the type of person she is. So how we've since repealed the old ordinance forbidding fortune telling. Now we're moving into a new realm of how we regulate this. From what I understand, there is no state or federal policy that regulates fortune telling or tarot reading or any of these services or workshops that could be in kind. There could be a small donation. It could be for a fee. And so once again, I go back to looking at what are our ordinances for businesses to operate in downtown Petoskey. If we're putting this under business ordinances, can I see some sample language of what you have to do? There's things that are regulated by the state, like when you're applying for a liquor license, it's very regulated by the state. So we don't really oversee any of that, except in maybe certain contexts in terms of like planning and zoning and how they administer that, but it's really done by the state. Medical marijuana establishments, of course, regulated by the state of Michigan. So I need examples of things that we regulate. And why? Is it in the absence of state and federal policy that would otherwise oversee this?
Mr. Terry.
I guess that's probably the easiest question. Yes, the easiest answer right there, yes. A lot of the other areas you're talking about are governed at the state level, and they're gonna ask for probably a whole lot of this and more. As far as fingerprints and background checks, liquor licenses, all those types of things, that's gonna get done. We don't regulate businesses here to that extent, no. If a business comes to town, what do I have you fill out? A business license, that's basically name, address, phone number. The purpose of that is to get a person, I get it to our assessor, and then we get them on the books and you get personal property taxes, and that's all that is. It's a one-shot deal. So you're not regulating a type of business. Here, you're actually regulating a type of business.
So we don't have any other examples of types of businesses we regulate.
You know, the other simple thing, I guess you could bring up like a vacation rental, you know, which is basically more of a permit of where is it located, check for fire extinguisher, basic safety type things. More so that it's an individual who comes in and does something and receives this, like, go stay at this house, you pay your money, you leave, and that's it. So it's a little different. I mean, but there are very few things that we would regulate.
So that's why I was having a hard time finding it.
Now, one time we regulated taxi cabs.
Okay,
That was more involved, but then the state made it illegal for local governmental entities to regulate taxi cabs, so you can't do that anymore. And that probably asks for more information, more like this.
thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
To have that sense of clarity, because I was struggling trying to find something that was parallel and I couldn't. So then that begs further questions.
Sarah,
We do have one transient trader. We are required.
Yeah.
Right now to do background check.
Right.
Those are transient merchants coming to town on a transient basis. Per day, per week, per season, selling their own fixed location. They're going in upon someone else's, like, buying and selling gold, and they go to separate hospitality.
Right.
They're required to
At
fill
the
out a
end,
very
yeah.
lengthy application, and it does go before public safety.
Would that be like transient traders? Would also be like the people that sell fireworks and they move in different locations seasonally? Was that something similar?
It would probably be similar, not so much that we have that at Petoskey.
Right.
You see that all over, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Do we collect receipts from those transient? Do we collect receipts for any other businesses?
And to be clear, we wouldn't collect those receipts. They would be holding them for future inspection. Really, the intent of that, again, is if there is an instance of reported fraud, we want to know who did this person see? When did they see him? How much were they charged? That's why they keep the receipts. It's not something that they would have to present to the city. They retain them. And those people that we're talking about too, the transient traders, anyone who's paying something they have to pay a tax on, I would assume that they have some sort of documentation that shows that transaction. So this is not something that is just beyond the pale that no one else is subjected to. So
That's helpful. Thanks.
council, anything else? Do you wish to have our city manager, city attorney work this through, come back for a first read? I see yes, I see yes. I see 3 yeses.
City council looking to still regulate this?
That's what I'm questioning right now.
I mean, do you want one? I mean, I'm hearing people that sound like they don't want an ordinance. I mean, so I don't know why we want to beat ourselves up trying to change some language, just to hear, we don't like this again.
Mr. Wagner.
Mayor, my comment is that if it helps our public safety department to have some legs to stand on for to prevent problems, I would like to see something. But it should be simple, I believe, and it should address that problem, not address businesses that are in business and not address religions. So
Well, I think.
so I'm not sure how.
Being minister and what have you here, if they're being minister, we might have to change some language in here, but you're excluded. It doesn't affect you. Okay. So, and I understand the party's talking about by our groups of all like faith, so that makes it pretty, everybody's supposed to do it. So I mean, something has to happen there. But I mean, if you have a recognized church that people go to and been here for years, known all over. That's gonna be a recognized church, and you're gonna be excluded from this, you're not gonna be filling this out. Okay.
Ms. Walker.
Well, I don't object to having an ordinance and I don't object to regulating it. I just wanted to see samples of things that we regulate, and it doesn't sound like there is any, there is. And so I'm a little torn in terms of like, how far do we proceed forward? What's the legal cost to do such a thing? I know that maybe it was only about 2 man-hours thus far. And so we can put a monetary value on that. Okay, excuse me. Well, that also is a concern of me of how much of taxpayer dollars we'd be spending on redefining legal language. But I will vote accordingly if that comes up for a vote.
Mr. Shields.
Mayor, I wonder this, what Mr. Wagner mentioned of wanting to hear from the community a little bit more. I wonder if before the city spends more time and effort in revising it, if we can hear from the community members before and council. I also am concerned about it just we're just gonna come back and I have serious concerns about the perception of people feeling discriminated against, not necessarily that I think this ordinance could work, but with some revision. And so I'm weighing, is the threat of scam necessary to outweigh the perception of discrimination? I have some serious concerns with it. I'll be open to looking at it again, but maybe before we spend more time on it, maybe we need to hear from the community members a little more.
Mr. Moore.
I'll just throw out one thought that occurs to me, having listened to everybody. You know, originally, my understanding when Chief Calabrese came to us, he was talking about the origin of this was actually kind of transients coming to town and taking advantage of local folks. And so when Sarah brought up transients, I'm wondering, you know, might that be a way to delineate what we're looking at as opposed to existing businesses who have been doing this for a period of time without any issues or concerns versus this threat of kind of transients injected into the community with bad intentions. So again, along the lines of trying to maybe define a target or a focus, I don't know if that might be helpful to meet the concerns that the former chief and perhaps you have as well. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm totally in support of that. Keeping it simple, focus. The original intent from the call or whatever it was that you two both got, we've gone far beyond that at this point. And I'm glad we took the one-liner off that wasn't enforceable.
So I guess what I'm kind of asking is perhaps Chief Breed could more narrowly define, you know, what the concern is and then work with council to narrow it down to that would be more specifically targeted to the concern that was initially.
Okay.
I think
just a thought.
that articulates what I'm thinking too. Thank you.
Normally, there. Let's first take the comment online and then I'll take some comments from public. Normally, we don't get into all this big discussion unless there's a motion in a second, but I'm okay with this at this point to get some resolve to it. Could you invite the person to speak?
She did a chat type one, so I can read it louder or make it bigger.
Could you read it since I can't see it?
So a chat message from online, Nicole Russell, 710 Elizabeth Street in Petoskey. Has the previous nuisance ordinance ever had to be enforced during the time it was on the books? Why waste the council's time if it has rarely or never been needed?
As discussed back in February, this has never been come up under Matt Breed as the Director of Public Safety. But as discussed in February, the previous director did say it had come up while he was here just prior to that. So in his opinion was that because we have this in place, you don't have it here. Take it away and you may have it here. He says those types of folks will tend to look at ordinances and say, now there's nothing in Petoskey. This is where we'll migrate to. That's his opinion, not mine. But that was what happened back in February, and that's when City Council directed staff to come back with some type of ordinance regulating this.
Ms. Walker.
And so in redirecting legal counsel to come up with some new language that dealt with all those specificities, I think that we're headed in the right direction now.
Okay. I'll take comments from public. As you can see, we are going to look at this with another reading and follow that would be a possible zoning ordinance, a motion, adoption possibly, but we're looking at 2 meetings away for that as at possible. Anybody wishes to address council at this point, they can, or they can save it until the next meeting time.
Ryan Donahoe again. I just want council to be careful with the language that you're using. Because when you mention ordained ministers, there are existing churches here in town that do not have ordained ministers. There are certain churches, other religious entities that within themselves as their group, they determine who is a minister. And so anytime government gets involved in regulating religion, that raises red flags for me, causes me concerns, not just for my faith, but for people of any faith.
Mhm.
My question or suggestion would be, is there a way looking at the existing transient policy where that could be examined and where perhaps that is already doing what you're hoping this to do? If it's true, we have records of who all these people are, they have to do paperwork, do all this, that seems to get to where this is trying to end up at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Real quickly,
Yes.
that's one of the avenues of going or letting sort of tuck this into the transient trader.
Right.
And I'm looking at it right now, and it requests some of the same information we're asking for this draft or fingerprints. So, I mean, that we could do that, we could tuck it in there. I do think that it would be beneficial. I don't know how we want to do this, just whether you want people who speak tonight, I think they're valuable because admittedly, it's foreign to me. It's foreign, I think, to a lot of us. So I think people who actually practice diligence should be involved to some degree, whether that's with me or with you all individually, and then sort of funnel that to me. I'll do that to you, but I think that
Sir.
Michael Hempstead, 515 Harvey Street, Petoskey. One thing that I'm hearing a lot is brick and mortar businesses and churches. I think it needs to also be addressed. There could be involvement far outside of that. For example, I too am an ordained minister and have in fact performed marriages. I woke up one day and it occurred to me that I could divine your future by reading your coffee grounds in the mug, and perhaps marketed that back online and said, you know, for $10, I'd be happy to do this. Am I operating outside of law? And is it incumbent on me to follow all these dictates? My second point is that I feel that fundamentally the fact that the city will accept applications and fees for this is a tacit acknowledgement by the city that this is not a harmful pursuit.
Thank you. So, city attorney will work with the city manager. Okay,
We will come back.
all right. Next on the business of the city. It's a new business under 9, and it's the adoption of a proposed resolution that would allow dining decks and parking spaces from May 15th to October 31st, 2022. For that, I'm turning it over to City Manager City Manager Terry. I apologize.
Thank you.
Wow,
Okay,
5 years.
Before we deny is a resolution that was put together by the Downtown Management Board. It's similar to the one that's done for the last couple of years. Back in 2020, we began allowing dining decks in the parking spaces for certain restaurants, basically too. Because of COVID restrictions. At that point, you had to space people out so you couldn't use your normal spaces within your restaurant. So one way of doing that and allowing more customers was to put dining decks in parking lots or spots. So the DMB has come back with the resolution. It's changed a little bit because of a couple of concerns on the way they're being used. The resolution would allow dining decks from May 15th to October 31st. Weather permitting, because as we get into fall, sometimes winter gets here a little sooner than expected. And we need the decks off the streets so we can plow them. One thing that would be different this year is it would allow one parking space per business. And that would affect basically City Park. I think there's, I don't know if there was just 2 wide or a little bit longer than that, but it was more than 1 parking space. So that one would get cut down to 1 parking spot. Then the other one we basically have is tap 30 in the pour. So there's 2 there, and that's a total of 2 spots there. So it would reduce the one that is in front of City Park to 1 parking space. There's also within the resolution required hours of operation. So it does require you to have a certain amount of operation time, 6 days a week, so many hours in a week. And then there's also listed in there, as you've read, all the different construction requirements in which you have to provide with the deck and what have you. And then it's also, it does have a monthly rental fee of $350. It's pretty much been what it has been in previous years. There has also been a desire by the DMV to make this a permanent operation. So they've been looking at coming up with language for a permanent ordinance the city council could look at. And that's one thing that they'd be trying to look at and get to city council prior to next year, which is what they were also trying to do this year. But next year to make this a permanent ordinance, but to try to keep it going this year with the resolution, because obviously we don't have time now. So they're looking to have an approval of this. Becky is here. She can provide more information and answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Shields.
Mayor, I will make a motion and follow up my question if that's okay.
Well, okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the enclosed resolution for the temporary dining deck or the seasonal dining deck resolution.
We have a support. I made a motion. Do I have a second? Also, I'll second. I have a motion from Mr. Shields, second from Mr. Wagner. Discussion, council.
I'd be interested from hearing from Ms. Goodman about the issues that were had and how those are being resolved. I think particularly one of them was trash. I'd be interested in hearing an update.
I think you'll find it interesting. It was actually addressed a week ago. Myself, Becky, and the 2 managers or owners of those businesses, along with Ben Slocum, sat down. The 5 of us worked out what we felt was a good plan, and both businesses are going to work together to make that happen. But I'll turn it over to Becky.
Well, we were quite some things. That's exactly what happened. Park Road, we did express that the ways of dining that remarkably, they have never discussed. But they had a very convenient conversation. We were 5 of us at the table, and I believe next door got out all of their feelings and expressed all of the things that were bothering them, and they were built, and they were addressed, answered, and I believe it was very good. Get very busy, but we're gonna have to watch that and make sure that it does not slide and that everyone does it.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore.
Hello, Ms. Goodman. I'm just, it looked like the parking folks were involved with this decision-making. Is that correct? Given our shortage of parking, that's why I'm raising that issue. And they're in agreement.
Yes.
Okay.
We had 2 committees working on this. They're all volunteer committees. We have a design committee working on it, see what it look like, and then we have a parking committee doing the operational investigation. How much it would cost, how many we have, where it would be, all those kinds of things. And they know that we do are short on parking, but they also realize we're short on restaurants and seats for diners during the summer. And we need more places, you know, that people sit down and eat, so that they stay in downtown, make it hungry, and not go out to eat.
Okay, and application wise then, have there been 3 entities that are seeking to do this or?
Currently, there are 2, well, 3, yes, Tap 30 and 4. And
Okay, do you anticipate others?
I don't anticipate others. Because of-
Right.
I'm sorry.
Because of the regulations.
Because of the regulations that are in place. And I've also talked to other restaurant owners, and they are not able to do it, they can't staff it. It's a lot of them staff it.
It's more than the regulations that are keeping those businesses from moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were not regulated out.
The $350 fee is what would be considered equivalent to a collection of parking meter fees or billing the meter. And so that's a trade-off of, so that money is going to,
The parking fund, and it's just a little bit more, than you would want, if you have that meter, that spot filled all the time. People that hundred, and that was, they looked at special assessments, they looked at taxable value, they looked at the assessment, and decided to take $220 a month in cost if you rented that space every single minute of the day and just had it.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore.
These questions are for Al. Al, I just want to be clear that what we're doing tonight is not a commitment for permanency going forward. That would come subsequently.
Correct. This is
Just
just
for this summer.
2022 resolutions for use of dining decks.
And then secondly, can you tell me, and I apologize, I should have got this question to you sooner, but are we certain that our liability insurance extends to these dining decks? Our city liability?
Any
insurance?
liability the city would have would extend to the dining decks.
Thank
Because we
you.
already have liability because of the streets, et cetera, and the sidewalks and all that type of things. Yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Miss Walker?
Yeah, I do have a question. I'm just wondering, I thought that the regulations were pretty strict, like you have to be open a minimum of 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Sorry, excuse me, Labor Day through Memorial Day. And so I went through the list of all possible businesses, restaurants downtown Petoskey, and I only came up with Tap 30 and Pour and City Park Grill would be the only 3 that would ever apply for them. I mean, the Mitchell Street Pub could, but they're right adjacent to Pour and Tap 30. And so would they be able to would you be able to take up a 3rd parking spot in a row? And maybe there's a staffing issue. Then I thought about Sam's Graces and Beacon Bistro, but you know, Beacon Bistro, Palette, Duffy's, Jose Tacos, they all have already dining decks like out front or out back. And like Jose's, he's not open 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, or whatever the regulations were. So I was like wondering why you would want to create a permanent ordinance for 2 businesses. I mean, I guess Stafford's, the Noggin Room could do it as well, but they also have above back dining in the HO Rose Garden. So I was just trying to think about big picture, and why would you create an ordinance for 3 businesses?
Becky, could you address that?
Duffy's is another one that can do it. I don't think that in the order, I think we ever looked at those. Very non-business specific. We don't know, no one knows who will be opening up next summer or summer after that. So if it does become an ordinance, I got resolution. If it does become an ordinance, that's the language that we put together and apply to anyone and provide it.
So this is just for this year.
No, I realize it's
We
a
can
year by year. I
address- we
understand.
can review that other,
No, I
but right
realize.
now we're focusing on one thing, and
I
that's
understand that.
2023, 2022, with the 2023 on future coming up, whether we do a yearly or whether we do permanent, but that's down the road. Okay, first we have a motion, a second, but we will go to the public. If you wish to weigh in on this, it's your opportunity to speak to city council regarding this matter. Your full name, full address, step up to the mic. Sarah, Beck, is there anybody online? Have them. Hello,
Hello, my name is Susan Smith of SAS Investment Company LLC, and I'm also one of the owners of 434 East Lake Street in Petoskey, a street-level office building located adjacent to the City Park Grill. At the onset of the COVID-19 epidemic, the city of Petoskey allowed City Park Grill to use 2 parking spaces, one of which was located in front of our building for an outdoor deck dining. While I was sympathetic to the fact that restaurants in Michigan were operating at reduced capacity and that outdoor deck dining was a temporary way by which to offset the reduced capacity, these tables were reinstalled this past summer and remained in place even though the COVID restrictions have been lifted. So on September 14th of 2021, I wrote a letter to Mr. Strabel, the now former city manager, and 3 other individuals who work for the city. And I outlined my opposition to the outdoor deck dining. And since writing my letters, I have learned that the City Park Grill also has outdoor sidewalk deck dining, or outdoor dining, excuse me, under the existing city ordinance. And in 2020, the City Park Grill was granted by city resolution 2 parking spaces for the outdoor deck dining in the street. When questioned about this by me, the city of Petoskey officials said that the outdoor deck dining is for the common good. While COVID may have been a reason for the outdoor deck dining initially, now that circumstances have improved, I fail to see proof in that statement. It seems that granting a vested interest to private property owners in the city parking spaces for a period of 6 months will not protect the city of Petoskey or its constituents or provide any real benefit given that outdoor deck dining already exists in downtown Petoskey. Surely there must be other and more creative ways to bring residents and tourists into downtown Petoskey than outdoor deck dining in the street. That being said, I am opposed to the future outdoor deck dining in the downtown city district of Petoskey for the following reasons. Public safety. This outdoor deck dining is located in the street. This is a distraction to drivers because it is on the street and can be a target for those drivers not paying attention to the road. Plus, the location of 432 Lake Street is across from the county courthouse, where police and emergency vehicles often are driving and parking. In other cities, people have been killed in the streets when dining outdoors in the streets. On March 5th, 2022, 2 women were killed in Washington, D.C. when a car hit them as they were dining at an outdoor restaurant. A similar event happened in New York City in 2021 when a man was killed while dining in the streets of Queens, New York. How can dining in the streets of Petoskey be safe? I don't understand how the council hasn't seen that. There's also the availability of outdoor dining in Petoskey. There's plenty of outdoor dining in Petoskey. Here are some of the restaurants that provide outdoor dining without it being in the street. The Palette Bistro, Roast and Toast, Julienne Tomatoes, Chandler's, Beard's Brewery, Backlot Beer Gardens, Perry Hotel, American Spoon, and the City Park Grill. The justification for the outdoor dining is for the common good, but well, whose common good? Does the city really need more outdoor deck dining in the streets? There's parking issues, as there's also fairness. I do not see the benefit to the downtown community for outdoor deck dining except to those restaurants that are granted that right. The city of Petoskey is using public property for private use and profit. Really, it seems to me that in reality, this is really granting a short-term lease to the restaurants that hopefully will be, excuse me, it seems to me that in reality, the city is granting a short-term lease to the restaurants that will be made permanent in the future. I also have concerns about liquor license violations, ADA violations, increased trash, insurance. You know, you just spoke about insurance, but the city's streets might be insured, but is it insured for insured for violations that are outside the terms of the insurance policies? In some, while the DMB and the city may have the belief that placing permanent structures in front of businesses adds vitality to downtown Petoskey, the deck that was placed in front of our property has caused harm to the business that is located there and has diminished our property value. It also seems that it's not as simple as saying that other cities do it, so it must be good for Petoskey. Other cities are having the same issues we're having at 434 East Lake Street. I provided an article from the New York Post dated October 21st, 2021, detailing these consequences. This resolution allowing outdoor deck dining has negatively impacted my property rights, and it will likely do the same for the city of Petoskey and its citizens. I would hope that you would reconsider any decision to continue the outdoor deck dining in the city of Petoskey. Just because other cities do it is not a reason to move in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to council? Sarah back online. We see 0. Ms. Walker first.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief of Police Breed, could you tell us, were there any incidents of safety around the outdoor deck dining? Try saying that 10 times in a row. Outdoor deck dining in 2020 or 2021 in those sites?
There were not.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore.
Ms. Goodman was, thank you. Was Ms. Smith included in the conversations you referenced earlier relative to the city park location?
No, she was not.
She is not mobile, I understand. Her tenant.
Okay.
Any other comments, council? Mr. Moore.
Chief Breed, were there any liquor license violations, or are you aware of any ADA alleged violations at that site?
There were not, and no, I am not. We do inspect those upon completion. We look at their plans. They have to be ADA accessible, with the sidewalk ADA accessible as well, which is sometimes a little challenging if you also have the outdoor dining, but it is manageable. But they have been in compliance. We also have to assure that their Michigan Liquor Control Commission license, their application is consistent with the diagrams that they have provided, both to us and to the MLCC. And we have had no issues.
Thank you.
There being no further discussions, I turn it over. We have a motion from Mr. Shields and a second from Mr. Wagner, and I'll turn it over to City Platt for roll.
Fields.
Yes.
Wagner.
Yes.
Moore. Aye. Walker.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. This is a temporary one-year plan. Becky, good luck to you. Next is the adoption of a proposed resolution that would authorize staff to execute agreement for Eagle, EGLE, for grant funding, purchase and installation of electric vehicle, which is EV, charging stations. I'm going to turn that over to City Manager Terry.
Sure, included within our capital improvement plan in the city's budget this year was a proposal for 4 EV charging systems. The total cost for the project was estimated $180,000, with 2/3 of that, $120,000 coming from the state of Michigan through Eagle, and with the city picking up the other $60,000 part of the project. There's 3 parts to this project, which is going through Eagle. There's the EV charger bid itself, with the low bidder being Blink Network for $85,000. There's the installation of those charging stations, with the low bidder being Select Electric in the amount of $27,100. And then there's the approval of the grant agreement with Eagle that we're looking for tonight from City Council as part of that package. The other portion of the project, the other $66,000, which is basically the site plan prep work, anything that has to get done to hook up the electricity, and then when that's all done, restoring the site and that type of stuff, sidewalks, etc., will be performed by city staff and our subcontractors at an estimated cost of $66,256. So that is the project. Now that we're beginning to know all the different parts of the project and the cost and the chargers, etc., we'll be coming up with determining a rate for those
Mhm.
units, which will take into account the electrical usage, the cost of the parking spot that the person is parked in, any processing fees and the cost of the equipment. So then we'll be coming up with a formula of how that would all be derived. So we're looking for the approval of the resolution that would approve the 2 bids and then also the authorizing the contract to be signed and executed with Eagle.
By Mike Robbins. Along with the 2 authorizations. You have any questions, council, or discussion first? Ms.
I
Walker?
have so many questions because I'm totally nerding out over here over these EV charging stations. So Mike, I wanted to ask you, would the Darling Lot new EV station replace the current electric vehicle charging station, or would it enhance and replace that older one, or be adjacent to it, or in that same lot somewhere?
We're gonna replace the existing charging station with the Blink station.
Okay. And then my second question related to that was, does that old charging station have any value still? Or can you, kind of like you put it back on the government bid website, or could it be repurposed in another location?
I think we could repurpose it possibly for city staff. I mean, it's a charger has no capability of charging for that service. So
Okay.
it could be used amongst city facilities in the future
Okay, okay.
for our own vehicles if we.
In the
want to
future,
get that way.
Vehicles in the city of Petoskey.
Yes, when we get there.
And then I have a second question, Mayor.
Fire away.
thank you. And then where would be the 2 locations in Bayfront Park?
Bayfront Park is when you first drive in and turn into the depot lot. We're gonna just take a hard right and we're gonna place a DC fast charge there and a dual port level 2 charger. And the reason we picked that location is because the infrastructure required for these stations is significant.
Okay,
We have 3-phase power in that corner and a location to place transformers that will serve these devices.
Very good.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Mr. Robbins, there's quite a wide disparity in the bid amount. And I'm just curious if you had any sense of why, and since we're recommending the lower bidders, if you have gotten references on them or.
Yeah, we called and talked to the bidders, and there are lots of variables to these bids. The bid did include a 5-year networking agreement, which was recommended by Eagle, so that we cannot do the transactions from these devices. Blink is also placed in Traverse City under the same grant program. They picked several locations. When you get into the details of the charging stations themselves, a lot of what's going on is availability and the timeliness that we ask to have the project performed. So there's just a multitude of bidders out there or vendors, and these are the only 3 that responded.
okay.
You mentioned something that was in my follow-up question, and that is that 5-year commitment for networking, operation, and maintenance.
Correct.
Is that part of the bid?
It is, that's part of the $85,000. And what that means is if we have that, we don't have staff that can work on these stations. So if, in talking to Blink, what will happen if we have a station fail, they'll basically show up, unbolt it and drop a new one in. It's that simple. Any of the networking or transaction, electronics and the modems and the SIM cards, that sort of thing that are going to be required is all the responsibility of Blink. They do charge us an 8% transaction fee that will be taken off the initial or the charging cost if we charge for charging, which we plan on. If that makes sense, we are hosting and owning these devices. So they typically, there's 2 different scenarios. Some private businesses have Blink place their charger on site. Blink determines the cost and cuts the owner of the property a cut of the charge. We are not doing that. We're owning the charging stations with a 5-year network agreement, O&M, and we will have the say in what that cost will be to charge. It's the transaction that we're going to have to compensate Blink for.
So I noticed that 5-year commitment for networking, operation, and maintenance is not included in the resolution. And I don't know if it needs to be there or you feel it's sufficient because it's a part of the bid.
5-year commitment for networking. It says it right there.
Yeah,
Oh, we're not in the resolution. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
It It is part of the bid which you're approving. So I would say it is covered. I thought we had that.
I see it. That's my
Okay.
error. Thank you.
Okay.
One more
So I
question, Mayor,
just-
if I may.
Go for the, one more question, then I'll come back to you.
Mike, could you say that in your application to Eagle, do you think it was beneficial that we are a municipally owned electric entity?
I do believe that is. Tell you a quick story with Eagle, the way this typically works for Eagle, you have a host, you have a utility, and you have Eagle. So typically they do a 33%, 33. I called the state and said, just because we're a municipal and a city, which is a host, we would have to pick up 2/3 of these costs. Is there any exception? Because we are a municipal electric and we are one. Would you be willing to pick up 2/3, 1/3? And they did agree to that.
Right.
So hence, but any of these other locations, they are sponsoring different sites around the state. And it's typically 1/3, 1/3, by the host and utility.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore,
Well done on the phone call.
Don't ask, don't get. So they've been great to work with. There's not a lot of strings attached to this. We are obligated to keep the chargers on site for 48 months. Other than that, there's some reporting we have to do. They're trying to keep track of the chargers and the use. But they've been great to work with.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to acknowledge that $60,000 is a substantial amount of money, and that I understand it seems like it could only benefit a few people in the community, those who own EV vehicles, and I will be transparent, I do own one. So I understand that it may seem that we're favoring only a small segment of the population, but I do applaud our city being proactive and taking advantage of monies that are available out there in the state. In this case, tripling our match. And I think that the benefit of having these charging stations will make up for the $60,000 investment. I was contacted out of the blue by someone from Ann Arbor who likes to vacation in Petoskey, who has I believe a Tesla charger, who requires a phase 3 superchargers. And he was commenting that there aren't a lot of those in northern Michigan, and he was encouraging us as a city to implement phase 3 chargers, and that he would be continuing to visit Petoskey to charge his car alone. So I think it is a potential economic driver that will benefit all of us. Now, I do have one concern though with the location is the one that you mentioned, the Darling lot. If we are putting the substantial investment in the site excavation, and there's been dialogue about parking garages and different renovations at the Darling lot, would we be losing out our investment? Is that a concern that city staff has?
Not from our any movement toward the whole parking lot, you're talking 2, 3, 4 years before it's ever gonna get built. You start with the whole construction process, probably past your 4-year time period, and then we can just remove.
I would only comment that the Darling lot is going to be the easiest site because the infrastructure is there. So we're going to unbolt and put the new one in. We do have to pull some new conductors, but essentially that space is already being provided. The other location, I was going to mention, the third location, is the Elks lot. North on the Elks lot near Bay Street. Positioned it in the central business district, kind of in different locations.
Correct.
And that will involve parked or metered spaces, so we can implement that also into this transaction. And the Bayfront Drive is the park, which will not have metered spaces or parking. So, but we're gonna look at all of that. Cost and where they're
Thank you. If the Darling lot wasn't an option, it sounds like it's a good pick. I was going to suggest that it be someplace where city staff can use, whether it's City Hall or DPW building, where city staff can utilize these. I think that would be in the public interest for the city staff to have future capability to do EV charging. But it sounds like there's another way, a route for that. It's using the old one, so I'm happy to hear that.
How is it monitored if somebody were to park in the space at the bayfront? Let's say they park and they just decide they don't want to pick their car up till for a day or two and then just leave it there. What's the policy?
Well, there is a lot to this, and we will be getting into that, but what happens typically is when you plug in your vehicle, you are on a clock for charge time. They have a grace period. When that vehicle is fully charged, you have so much time to get back to your vehicle, unplug and remove your vehicle. If you do not, you are still on the clock. And there is a time of that vehicle sitting in that stall, not allowing others to charge and also taking up parking. You can structure this any way you would like it, but that's typically what's happened. Traverse City, if you're in a stall and you're plugged in and that cord is not removed in the time slot after charge, the clock is still spinning. And that's all through Blink in that transaction. However, we set that up.
Okay.
And you'll have an app to tell you that your car is
Yeah,
charged.
they'll give you.
So it's not like the owner
notice that
doesn't
you're
know.
fully charged.
It'll say you're charged, you'll get your car and get it off.
And those are run without an actual paying into the meter part of it, correct?
Right, yeah.
You're paying into the recharging, the charging machine. Do I have a motion?
Just one.
Another
other-
question.
one other-
Sure,
it's
sure.
simply a comment. I was part of a conversation last week and somebody from northern Michigan took their Tesla down to Florida for spring break. And when they came back and got close to town, they were amazed that their little panel came up and told them exactly where charging stations were in Petoskey. So I can see that being a benefit and a differentiator for people coming here with an electric car to know where they can go charge it.
I was on the site PlugShare today, looking at different sites around the state, and they have Bayfront Park already plugged in. I don't know how. A wrench on the station, and it says soon to be coming. It states that we received a grant.
All right.
So it's out there, I don't know. But quite fascinating.
Taking it back to council, is somebody wish to make a motion in a second? Mr. Moore has a hand up.
So moved.
Mr. Moore makes the motion. Ms. Walker makes the second. That is for the three things, him signing the contract for the city, as well as the two bids. Any other discussion, council? Does the public wish to weigh in at this point? Full name, full address? There being none. There being none, I take it over to City Clerk Plath for roll.
Demore,
Aye.
Walker. Aye. Shields,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes. Motion for this project passes 5-0. Next and last on the list is the adoption of a proposed resolution that will establish dates and designate locations for the 2022 ward and city conventions. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Terry.
Sure, it's just our annual resolution to establish the sites and times for the city ward and city conventions. And the ward conventions will be on July 11th. They're always at 8 p.m. and they'll be at the same locations they have been at: the middle school, Ottawa Elementary, Lincoln, and Sheridan. And then the city convention will be on July 13th. That once again will be at the Emmett County Fairgrounds. Some people ask why did this get moved earlier, which we did a number of years ago, and that's because the state laws require us to have all the affidavits of identity in by that date of July 21st, so all the ballots can get printed out, et cetera, et cetera. That all happens much earlier now because the absentee ballots have to be out much earlier now, all that kind of process. So it just keeps getting moved forward and forward quicker and quicker. So.
There's motion approved, proposed resolution.
A motion from Mr. Shields.
I'll support.
And a second from Mr. Wagner. Adoption of the city and ward conventions. Any other discussion, council? Public wish to weigh in? I turn to city staff. You clear, Brian?
Yes,
Shields,
yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Demore. Aye. Walker,
Yes,
Murphy,
Yes. Motion to accept those dates and times and locations are set. Remember, it's 8 o'clock, not 7 o'clock. It's set by the way. You can't change it because it's set by the charter.
I know.
Now, last on the agenda is the city council comment. And I will start with Ward 4, Ms. Walker.
No comment, Mayor.
I'll go to Ward 3.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. I was in Columbus, Ohio over the last few days to see my son and his wife. And one of my observations down there is driving by car lot. Looked like they had full inventory. And their neighborhood was full of houses going up with plenty of supplies to build them, I mean, hundreds. And I hope that's a sign is coming here because we don't have car inventory. We've got builders that saying they don't have the people to build, they don't have the materials. And so I'm hoping that's a good sign. And then the other thing I just want to say is I think we always do, all of you who came here tonight to share your perspectives and concerns. Thank you so much. The emails, the FaceTime, the letters to the city, I just really appreciate it. It's a great part of my job. Thank you.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ward 2.
Yes, so I received in the mail, it's Stop the Spread of Swallowwort in Petoskey. Swallowwort is an invasive plant. And one of the treatment protocols is using herbicide. I just want to say from my professional background, I understand there's concerns of using herbicide, but the swallowwort, it's a necessary evil. It's a necessary tool to control this invasive plant. And I want to applaud the city for partnering with our local invasive species group to try to control or maybe even eradicate this infestation, which affects our native biodiversity, such as the monarch butterfly that we all treasure. So I encourage our community to respond to the letter and the notice and to hear the city and the invasive species group out on the need for controlling the swallowwort. This is one of those things that it needs a community, needs everybody coming together. It's piecemeal, it won't work, it won't be as effective. So it's rewarding. It's a rewarding thing to be able to protect our native natural heritage. And so I again just want to applaud the city for partnering in this way.
Ward 1.
I
Ms.
too
Demore.
just want to extend my thanks to all of those folks here and online and written submissions who offer their voice constructively. When we respectfully disagree, it's a good thing. It's how we learn. And I genuinely appreciate that input. And I also just want to say thank you to Chief Reed, Mr. Robbins, and council for your valued input. It's really helpful. So thank you.
I've had the opportunity of attending a session, online session with mayors of small cities with MML. It went on for an hour and a half, 2 hours. It was very good in talking about concerns for the city. I also attended a fair housing last Thursday. I think, Lindsay, I saw your name was also on there. But it's on fair housing. There's going to be 3 or 4 more pieces of this as it comes on. So I try to educate myself on all of these things as we go through. Again, thank you for your participation, all of you. This is what makes Petoskey a better place than any other place in the world, is that I think the council, it's a great council. We're very open to working with the public, with you guys, because you're just as much as important here as we are. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for your comments. With there being no further business to come before this council, I've got one other thing. If you have the opportunity and you haven't looked at, on the Carnegie Building, is a great looking map, a flag of the Ukraine with a white dove on it. It was made by London Kay, who actually started and directed it. It was fulfilled by many people, as well as some 20 crocheters in Petoskey, along with Miss the more helping to lead the way to put it all together. I was fortunate to be down there one Thursday last week or whatever day it was, and to thank her publicly for coming to Petoskey and offering this to us. So it'll be here for 30 days, and then it's going to some other big city place.
Actually, Italy.
Italy, it's going to Italy. So if you wish to see it, please walk by, stop by. There are also little hearts, yellow and blue hearts that are tied up, made of yarn, that are tied on a railing there. Those were put on, we tied those on, and you said those are to take, if you wish to take one as a part of a piece to take home of this, you're invited to take one of those as well. So there'll be no further business before this council. I call this meeting adjourned at 9 o'clock.